Things aren't looking good for LaMelo Ball in the NBA right now, and something's gonna change real soon. One of the biggest debates in basketball right now is how good LaMelo actually is. The average NBA fan will probably tell you that he's fun, very talented, but a loser. He's injury prone and he doesn't play winning basketball. That's a narrative that makes sense if you aren't paying attention, because if LaMelo was as good as everybody thinks he is, you'd assume the Hornets would be a lot better. And while it's hard to dispute because of how bad the Hornets have been since they drafted LaMelo, but for the people that actually watch the games, follow the team and understand what's really going on in Charlotte, they know fine well that if the Hornets have 99 problems, LaMelo Ball is the least of them. He's one of the best young point guards in the NBA, don't let them lie to you. His talent is being wasted, but hopefully not for too much longer, because with the new reports that have just come out, it seems now that LaMelo's days in Charlotte are numbered. And perhaps the straw that broke the camel's back was the fact that we recently witnessed one of the biggest robberies in the history of All-Star Weekend. You might not realize this, but LaMelo Ball not being an All-Star might have just ruined the event for years to come, because nothing like this has ever happened before. Yes, we've seen great players have great seasons and not get picked, but this is different. In All-Star fan voting, there are 4 categories: Western guards, Western forwards, Eastern guards, and Eastern forwards. SGA led the Western guards in voting and is starting in the All-Star game. LeBron James led the Western Conference forwards in fan voting and is starting in the All-Star game. Giannis led Eastern Conference forwards in fan voting and is starting in the All-Star game. And yet LaMelo Ball, who led Eastern guards in fan voting, is not only not starting in the All-Star game, he didn't even make the bench. How does the most popular guard in the conference, who among guards is second in points per game behind only soon-to-be MVP SGA, not get chosen to be an All-Star? How does the Eastern Conference's second leading scorer behind only Giannis not make the All-Star team? Never in the history of the event has a player number 1 in fan voting not made the All-Star game. But it gets even crazier when you really break it down. There are 24 players going to All-Star weekend. Among all players, LaMelo was 8th in total votes. There are 10 starters across both teams. 12 of those 24 All-Stars represent the Eastern Conference. Only Jason Tatum and Karl Anthony Towns received more votes in the East than LaMelo Ball. He was 3rd in the entire conference in voting and still wasn't an All-Star. And this raises a bigger question. It's not even about LaMelo specifically, this is about the integrity of All-Star Weekend. Because what is the point in All-Star Weekend? It's a celebration for the fans, bringing together the NBA's top talent and showcasing them all together on the same court. Historically, these players have been selected by the fans, and over 10 million fans voted for who they wanted to see. 2.4 million of them went out of their way to specifically vote for LaMelo Ball because they wanted to see him be an All-Star. And yet he wasn't selected. Even when Giannis Antetokounmpo and Anthony Davis had to withdraw from the All-Star game, Kyrie Irving and Trae Young were chosen to replace them. Both of those guys are point guards, which means there are now 10 guards in the All-Star game, and of those 10, only one of them had more votes than LaMelo Ball. So what does this really mean? It means the All-Star fan vote is a facade and counts for absolutely nothing. Tell me, why should I bother voting for my favourite players next year if a player can finish number 1 in voting for his category and not be one of the 12 players chosen to represent his conference? All of this changed in 2016-2017 when Zaza Pachulia became a meme, and with the support of Dub Nation in his home country of Georgia, he beat out the likes of Kawhi Leonard in fan voting. The NBA then decided to change the voting format to prevent meme selections like this from happening, which is why now the media and player votes count for 25% each. So they say the fan vote still counts for 50%, which is the majority, but you have to ask, how is that the case? Because even when one of the 12 players is injured and has to withdraw, they don't replace them with the most voted player. No, Trae Young had 923,000 fan votes, less than half of LaMelo with 2.4 million. So LaMelo beat Trae in fan voting, finished ahead of him in player voting, and yet he isn't an All-Star? Why? Because the media screwed him over. Other than the fan voting, the 2 main criteria are the players and media vote. Let's break it down. LaMelo finished 3rd among Eastern guards in the player vote with 68 votes, coming in behind only Jalen Brunson and Donovan Mitchell. So he's 1st amongst fans, 3rd amongst players, but then 7th from the media. LaMelo received just 3 votes from the media, and because of this, with a weighted score of 3.0, he came in 3rd place in total voting among Eastern guards. And that is why he isn't starting in the All-Star game. Now logically, you would think that the All-Star reserves would be selected based on the collective vote combined, but no, the NBA decided that coaches should get to vote in the All-Star reserves, and the coaches chose chose Darius Garland, Damian Lillard and Tyler Herro ahead of him, and then obviously Trae Young as the injury replacement. It really doesn't make sense to me how every year everybody's complaining about how much of a joke the All-Star game has become, and people are stressing out about the ratings crisis the NBA is in right now, and yet when the people spoke up and chose who they wanted to see and watch play in an event, he's not going to be there. To me, all of this highlights a huge disconnect in how good people think LaMelo Ball actually is, because you can't just say he's a fan favourite who is overrated by casuals who don't understand the game, because the players who compete against him on a nightly basis agree that he's one of the best guards in the league, and who would know better than them? You'd think on the flip side you can't say that the media hate him and just have an agenda, because the coaches, who are second to only the players in terms of expertise, they side with them. That is unless they have an ulterior motive. See, LaMelo has never been treated fairly by the media. This dates back to his high school days, where he was called the most hated high school player of all time. Prior to the NBA, LaMelo was constantly criticised for just being a kid, and none of this had anything to do with LaMelo, it was more so his father. LaVar Ball became public enemy number 1 and was constantly hated on by mainstream media because of how he chose to raise his sons. He was called a terrible father, this and that, which in hindsight is quite funny considering all 3 of his sons are multi-millionaires, with Lonzo and LaMelo sharing almost $500 million in career earnings so far, and LiAngelo Ball, the middle son, just signed a 7-figure record deal and has been one of the biggest breakout artists so far in 2025.
Don't tweak your television, that is indeed LiAngelo Ball!
What's also funny is LiAngelo Ball is actually booked to perform at this year's All-Star Weekend. Who would have thought in a season where LaMelo was top 5 in points per game that the undrafted brother who was cut from a G League team would be at All-Star Weekend ahead of him? Who would have thought in 2017 when Lonzo was at UCLA and went on to be the number 2 pick by the Lakers and was tipped to be the next Magic Johnson, that LiAngelo Ball would be at All-Star Weekend before him? Our reality is some crazy multiverse. But it's not just the media who have never embraced LaMelo or the Ball family, it's the coaches too, and a big reason for this may be because back in 2017 when LaVar Ball dominated the media space, he was very hard on Luke Walton and blamed him for not utilising Lonzo correctly in LA.
We're not concerned with what parents think of how we're coaching the team.
NBA coaches didn't like this. Steve Kerr spoke out publicly against LaVar and had the backing of Greg Popovich and Rick Carlisle, 3 championship coaches with a ton of respect around the NBA. It got to the point where several coaches came together to ask media relations staff to remove the media credentials and privileges of basketball writers who associate themselves in any way with LaVar Ball, essentially attempting to blackball him from basketball media. And if you wonder why we rarely hear from LaVar Ball in the media anymore, that's probably why. You see, the players and fans have no reason to dislike LaMelo Ball. He's one of the most entertaining hoopers to watch, and opponents who play against him and experience his wizardry firsthand, they tip their hat and respect it. Now, is it a coincidence that the 2 categories of voters that completely screwed him over and don't hold him in the same regard have well-documented feuds with his father dating back years? You tell me. But what empowers them to snub a guy that statistically is playing at an all-star level and averaging more points, more rebounds, and more assists than some of the players selected ahead of him? It's simple, the narrative. Because the Hornets are a bad team with just 12 wins this season. Charlotte are right down at the bottom of the Eastern Conference with no chance of even making the play-in game, and the fact that this has been the case for years now makes it easy for them to push the narrative that LaMelo's just a stat padder and doesn't impact winning. Coaches and media can easily hide their agenda by saying they want to reward players that win, even though the All-Star game is supposed to be based on individual performance. The problem is that nobody watches the Charlotte Hornets, and I completely understand why, they always suck. But because of this, I don't think the average NBA fan actually understands just how bad they are. And this has been the case long before LaMelo Ball. In the near 40-year history of the Charlotte Hornets, they are objectively speaking the least successful NBA franchise. They have 0 championships, one of just 10 teams to never win one. They have never made the NBA Finals, one of just 5 teams to never do so. They have never made the Conference Finals, one of just 2 teams to never do so. And they are the only NBA team that has never won a division title. They have the second least playoff appearances in NBA history, behind only the New Orleans Pelicans. They have played the least amount of playoff games in NBA history with 38. The Pelicans have the second least and they've played 59. The Bobcats teams from the early 2010s are quite possibly the worst NBA team ever assembled. Now bear in mind that the Hornets play in the Eastern Conference, which historically and especially over the last 25-30 30 years has been considered the weaker conference. In the last 20 years, the Hornets have made the playoffs twice. Now, in a weaker conference where 8 of 15 teams make the playoffs, that means you have an above 50% chance of making the playoffs every season. To only make the playoffs twice shows you just how bad this franchise is. When you're one of the worst teams every year, you end up in the lottery with a high draft pick and a chance to get a young player. The Hornets have repeatedly failed. In the last 15 years, we've seen them draft Michael Kidd-Gilchrist over Damian Lillard, Cody Zeller over Giannis, Noah Vonleh over Nikola Jokic, Frank Kaminsky over Devin Booker, Malik Monk over Donovan Mitchell. The best two players they've ever drafted are Kobe and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. They traded them both on draft night. And all of this happened prior to LaMelo Ball, and despite not making the playoffs in the 5 years since they drafted him, they've not done a better job at drafting at all. James Bouknight and Kai Jones were lottery picks in 2021. Both of them are out of the league. In 2022, they had 2 first-round picks. They drafted Jalen Duren, traded him, and ended up taking Mark Williams with their other pick. They did hit on Brandon Miller in 2023, but then in 2024 they drafted Tijon Salon, and then traded Mark Williams, their center, for Dalton Knecht. And although the trade was rescinded, it's a bad trade either way, because they could have just drafted Knecht over Salon, and they wouldn't have had to give up Mark Williams, and if the trade does end up going through, now they don't have a center to build around long term. But the incompetence of the Hornets organization doesn't stop there. The lack of mentorship and support that these young players get from the team, they have neglected a lot of their young players and allowed them to go down bad paths. Just look at this track record. Miles Bridges was suspended for an entire NBA season facing domestic abuse charges. James Bouknight was found passed out in a car with a firearm on his lap and charged with a DUI. Brandon Miller allegedly delivered a firearm that was used in a murder of a mother. Montrezl Harrell faced federal charges after being found with 3 pounds of marijuana in the backseat of his car. Kai Jones was on Instagram Live tweaking, and many people speculated he was on hard drugs.
I had to do drugs on No,
Devontae Graham was placed on probation after pleading guilty to a DUI. Terry Rozier was recently accused of throwing games while playing for the Hornets for gambling companies. Dwayne Bacon admitted that he was depressed when playing for the Hornets. Malik Monk was suspended for violating the NBA's drug policy. I bring all of this up not to shine any bad light on any of these players, but to highlight the fact that there's something seriously going wrong in Charlotte. And in an environment where all of this happens, you have a young LaMelo Ball who's portrayed to be the bad guy within the media, yet the so-called wild child, the son of the big bad LeVar Ball, with $500 million in the bank in his early 20s, what controversies has he been in off the court? Is he out here flexing guns on the internet, paying hush money for abortions? You've not seen him spit the dummy out, demand a trade, trash his teammates, or throw his coaches under the bus? A lot of the young stars in his situation would have folded by now. Call LaMelo a losing player all you want, but what have the Hornets actually done to help him? Look at his coaches. James Borrego, 2 years, a below 500 coach, no longer has a head coaching job in the NBA. Steve Clifford, 2 years, he no longer has a head coaching job in the NBA and has a 42% win rate. And now he's got Charles Lee, a rookie head coach with no experience who so far has a 25% win rate. So LaMelo's never had a competent front office capable of identifying and developing young talent. He's also never had a coach who knows how to win in this league. And what about the players he's played with? LaMelo Ball has never had an all-star teammate. For 5 years in the NBA, not only has his team never made a significant trade to acquire anybody to get better, the only marquee free agent they ever signed was a washed-up Gordon Hayward, who missed more than half of his games as a Hornet and retired just months after leaving the team. Everybody knows that the only reason Gordon Hayward came to Charlotte was to secure one last contract. He did not care about basketball. And that takes me to another point. What the heck is going on with the Hornets medical staff? What people do when they judge LaMelo Ball is they look at his team on paper. They see Brandon Miller, Mark Williams, Miles Bridges, and you know, that's a pretty solid young core. But in the last 2 years, those guys played less than 20 games on the court together. LaMelo's missed the majority of the last 2 seasons with injury, but he's not the only one. Brandon Miller and Grant Williams are currently done for the year. Mark Williams is in year 3 and has pretty much been injured since he got drafted, starting just 56 games in his career, mostly playing on a minutes restriction under 25 25 minutes a night. And by the way, in regards to LaMelo and his health, he's shown before that he's not soft. When he injured his wrist as a rookie and the Hornets had a chance of making the playoffs, he rushed back to play. But ask yourself, when your team is tanking trying to lose games to get top picks, then what's the point in coming back at all? A lot of the time LaMelo actually wants to come back sooner, but is advised by the organization to take his time. A player shutting it down for the year when the season's over to try and get a top draft pick does happen in the NBA, but for the Charlotte Hornets it's a yearly occurrence. The season is almost always over and written off by Christmas, and it's just an endless cycle of rebuilding. The franchise is beyond a disaster. There is absolutely nothing positive about this team. And the last thing I'll say to anyone that doesn't think LaMelo contributes to winning basketball, the Hornets are 12-21 when LaMelo plays this season, which is still bad, don't get me wrong, but it's a hell of a lot better than what they look like without LaMelo Ball. Without LaMelo, the Hornets have played 18 games this season. They have a 1-17 record without him. There is not a single guard in this league that could play with these Charlotte Hornets and take them to the playoffs. So comparing LaMelo's situation in Charlotte to the likes of Cade Cunningham, Tyrese Halliburton, Trae Young, Ja Morant and other young point guards across the league is just not fair because the situations aren't even comparable. How can you expect LaMelo to win games with this G League roster? People look at his shot attempts and say he's a shot chucker, but what they don't realize is LaMelo is actually a great passer and a very willing one. When he first came into the NBA, he was pass first. But tell me right now, who is he supposed to pass to when he's surrounded by a group of players that can't make shots? It's a shame because everybody hoped that when Michael Jordan sold the team they could start over, but the new front office is just as incompetent. They proved that with the Tijon Salon pick and the Mark Williams trade with the Lakers. I mean seriously, you know the guy's injury history, you're a new GM in the league, and you try to pull a fast one on Rob Pelinka and the Lakers? Do you know what that does to the trade value of Mark Williams? Do you know how badly that damages his reputation in the league? Do you know how skeptical front offices will be dealing with the Charlotte Hornets going forward? You're the Charlotte Hornets, you're the worst NBA franchise, and now you've just made enemies with the Lakers, the #1 biggest franchise. What a great way to introduce yourself to the NBA, Jeff Peterson. It's just a shame when you look across the league and other guards and what their teams have done to build around them, and you compare that to what LaMelo's had so far in Charlotte. The saddest thing about it is LaMelo actually doesn't want to leave. Contrary to popular belief, he isn't in a hurry to get to a big market. No, he wants to uplift and build the Charlotte Hornets. He said so many times that he wants to play for one team his entire career. He loves the city of Charlotte. You never see him being buddy-buddy with players on other teams, on the phone to other stars, recruiting. In the off-season, when you see LaMelo playing pickup, he's playing with kids at his own Puma 1-of-1 events. Heck, Lonzo and Jello have had a podcast for the best part of a year now, and LaMelo's yet to make a guest appearance. As far as he's concerned, if you ain't on the Hornets, he isn't interested. And the fact that he's put up with this for as long as he has and still hasn't asked for a trade shows the commitment he has to the city and the organization. But they are failing him, and it's looking like it's going to be out of his hands because I'm telling you right now, the Charlotte Hornets will not pay LaMelo Ball the Supermax extension. We just saw the Mavs let Luka go, who took them to the finals. These owners are not paying LaMelo Ball upwards of $300 million to be in the lottery every year and miss half the season. It's just not happening. And that's why you're starting to hear rumors that the Hornets are considering trading LaMelo Ball. And at this point, they honestly should. I didn't want it to happen, but the fact of the matter is LaMelo is entering year 6 next year, and whatever rebuild they attempted to do in his first 5 years has crashed and burned. There's nothing they can do short term to turn this around. The damage is already done. The GM and coach have even said that the plan in Charlotte is to build through the draft. Now we all know you only get picks in this league one of two ways, by tanking seasons or trading a star player. If that's the plan, then trading LaMelo makes the most sense. Get as many first round picks as you can and a young player or two. Then build your team around Brandon Miller and whoever you get in this year's draft. They're hoping for Cooper Flagg. I believe 100% that this is all going to happen. The Hornets are going to trade LaMelo Ball. He might finally break and ask for a trade. I wonder how much more of this he can take. When it happens, I don't know. They're not exactly in a rush to do so. It could be this summer, could be next year's trade deadline. But a key thing to remember is that LaMelo wasn't drafted by this new ownership. And you have to think that if the Hornets are to become successful in the future, the new ownership will want to be credited for turning the franchise around. It's hard to imagine they will want people to associate any of the success they have with the previous regime. I believe it's time to move on. LaMelo Ball is being wasted in Charlotte. He's going to be 24 years old soon, and it's proven that this year that it doesn't matter how well he performs on the court individually. He can't even make an all-star game while all of his peers are raking up all kind of individual accolades. Teams always below 500, always in the lottery, never competing fighting for the play-in, never mind the playoffs, and I just see no way it gets better anytime soon. Tell me if you disagree, but I don't see a timeline where the Hornets build a championship contender with LaMelo in the next few years. So what's eventually going to happen is they're going to blow it up and we'll see LaMelo Ball playing for a new team way sooner than you think. And ultimately his time in Charlotte will end up no different to guys like Kemba Walker and others who wasted valuable years of their career playing for nothing in North Carolina. The only question is now is which team's going to trade for LaMelo Ball? You tell me who needs a young superstar point guard that needs some buzz and excitement in their city. And if you disagree with anything I've said in this video, share your thoughts and feedback down below in the comments, and check out our last video on LaMelo Ball in the middle of your screen if you enjoyed this one and question how good he really is. I know you'll enjoy that one. Subscribe to the channel if new around, and on that note, it's DKM signing out until next time, and peace.